Hello, and welcome to the Awareness and Action series put on by the City of Winnipeg's Equity Office in partnership with the Human Rights Committee of Council. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ali Raposo, and I am the coordinator of the Human Rights Committee of Council. I'd like to begin by gratefully acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Ininu, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our clean drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. The Land and Water Acknowledgement is an important part of the Truth and Reconciliations Commission's 94 calls to actions. It's a powerful gesture demonstrating respect for the Indigenous peoples as rights holders, their histories, and their traditional lands where we all work and live, benefiting from these resources. Before we begin, I want to let everyone know that the City of Winnipeg is recording this session for educational purposes. Questions posed by participants are included in what is recorded. This collection of personal information is authorized under Section 36(1)(b) of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act and will be used for continued informational and educational purposes. It will not be used or disclosed for any further purposes unless required or permitted by law. If you have any questions, you may contact the Corporate Access and Privacy Officer. A recording of today's event will be made available on the CityNet and winnipeg.ca websites. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask today, you can submit it by using the Q&A in the Zoom webinar event. You can ask it anonymously by making sure to select that option before clicking send. We will make every effort possible to address all questions during our time here today. And to turn on the closed captions, select More, Captions, English, and Show Captions. Within captions, you can also adjust caption settings to best suit your needs. If you lose your connection to this event, please just use the same link to rejoin. And today's speaker is Shauna Ilsley, but first we have a special guest and member of the Human Rights Committee of Council, Dr. Reese Malone, to provide greetings and an introduction to Shauna and her keynote today. Welcome, Dr. Malone.
Thank you, Ali. My name is Dr. Reese Malone. I'm a member of the Human Rights Committee of Council for the City of Winnipeg, and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce my colleague over several years and a friend, Shauna Ilsley, who was raised in northern Manitoba, the Pasquak Cree Nation, and Churchill. Her grandparents are settlers from Iceland, Scotland, and England. She is married, has 4 children, and recently became a grandmother. Her family are Cree from Sapata Wayak Cree Nation. She resides with her family in Winnipeg. Shauna and her husband are raising their children with Indigenous science and ceremony. They work every day to incorporate the resistance of colonization and residential schools into their children's identity. Shauna is the executive director of the Manitoba Harm Reduction Network and has worked in harm reduction since 2000. She completed a Master's of Science, and her experience has included working with people who use drugs that are impacted by structural and colonial violence. Shauna works from the foundation that people are experts in their own lives. Her work includes using an anti-racism and anti-oppression lens, focusing on system harms with the goal of abolishing systems that make substance use harmful, including the war on drugs. Again, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Shauna Ilsley.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I first want to say I have a little bit of a headache. I tried to get rid of it this morning, but it's still hanging out a bit. So I apologize if I'm a little bit off today. I want to thank everyone for having me here. I do want to acknowledge before I do my own little introduction here that when we talk about harm reduction at the Manitoba Harm Reduction Network, we usually spend 3 days talking about it. So today we're really just going to have a quick snapshot or a quick picture of some of the key principles of harm reduction, as well as the definition. I also want to encourage folks to participate. There'll be a couple times when I'll ask folks to think about some questions and maybe participate in the chat if you feel inclined to do that. And so let's see here. So again, I really quickly will just do a bit of my own land acknowledgement here. So my name is Shauna Ilsley, and my spirit name that I just started to carry, my new name that I started to carry, is Star Thunder Warrior Woman, which I received from an elder from Nelson House, Cree Nation up north, and I received that new name as I moved into grandparenthood. So I am honored to carry that name. And my pronouns are she and her. And like Reese said, I was raised on Indigenous lands in northern Manitoba, where the caretakers are the Innu, the Anishinaabe, the Dene, and the Inuit. And I really want to take a moment just to recognize our Inuit relatives who are stewards of northern Manitoba, both the Hudson's Bay as well as the coastline up there. You don't often hear the Inuit acknowledged as stewards of the land here, so I just wanted to take a moment to do that. And my home fires do burn in the Opaskwayak Cree Nation and Churchill, Manitoba. So just like our opening remarks, I also want to acknowledge the water. As somebody who comes from northern Manitoba, the water is really important to me and to my family. And we are honored, of course, to come from really lovely, clean, healthy water that still exists in northern Manitoba. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that. And my communities that I was raised in are signatories to Treaty 5. And it's important to recognize, as we talk about harm reduction, that the violation of the treaties plays a role in the state that our systems are in, that of course leads to increased harms related to substance use. Not making substances themselves harmful, but the conditions in which people use substances are more harmful. And so these communities promised to share the land and resources with these 31 First Nations communities. And what we know is that those treaties have not been honored. And as a result, although all of our communities can experience harms related to their substance use, some of our communities experience more harms. And of course, that's connected to things like social determinants of health, access to healthcare, access to mental health supports, access to clean drinking water, all of those kinds of things. So really important for us to take a moment to reflect on the responsibilities that our non-Indigenous communities also hold when we talk about treaty relations. I am a settler. I won't go too deep into who my family is, but I do want to acknowledge and have to take a moment from my own teachings to just acknowledge my ancestors and how we got here, recognizing that my ancestors were both complicit as well as participated in the colonial process. And so my Icelandic family, of course, settled in what was identified as the Icelandic Reserve by Gimli, where my great-great-grandmother was able to, great-great-great-grandmother was able to stake claim in land and therefore participated in the stilling of the land. And then my English and Scottish family, I can't tell you too much about what their settlement looked like here, because my English and my Scottish family are not storytellers like my Icelandic family. But of course, they witnessed and participated in colonial violence as well. And then I have to acknowledge all of the people who have been responsible for parenting me. And these are a few of them. Up in the top corner there is Joy and Ahab Constant. That is my mother and my stepfather. In the middle is my Amma, my grandmother, who is and was the matriarch of our family. And then down in the bottom corner is Bruce Martin, who is my father, who was born and raised in Churchill and raised most of his children. Most of us spent a lot of time up in Churchill with him as well. And then up in the top corner is Edna Stevens, who is my mother-in-law. And she has been my mother-in-law for almost 30 years now. And she is the matriarch of our family. And then I also acknowledge Leslie Spillett at a time when I needed to be mothered. She stepped in and we adopted each other in ceremony. So these are some of the folks who have taught me a lot, but also the folks in my life who have taught me and modeled harm reduction in a really great and profound way for me as well. And of course, I have to acknowledge my family. My husband and I have 4 children, and they range from 30 down to 14 years old. And we have a couple children-in-laws as well. And like my introduction said, we do raise our family in ceremony with Indigenous science at the forefront of how we participate and make our way and move through our lives. And down on the corner there is our brand new addition, which is our grandbaby Audrey, who is just over 6 months old now. So these are a few of the folks who continue to teach me a lot about harm reduction and continue to teach me about what substance use looks like in our next generation, but also continue to exceed what my generation knows, and constantly challenge us to move forward in a good way. I'm not going to say much here other than I am over at the Manitoba Harm Reduction Network, which I really appreciate being there, but I do recognize that there's a beautiful transition hopefully happening in this province when it comes to harm reduction, and we look forward to seeing what that means for our organization. But to get us started, I really would like some participation from folks in attendance here. One of the things I want to recognize is that when we often talk about things like harm reduction or substance use, it really comes from a pathologizing, stigmatizing kind of space where we want to talk about substance dependence, and narrow our focus when we think about harm reduction to that level of relationship with substances. And the reality is that lots of people use substances. In fact, the research shows 70 to 80% of people have used an illegal or illicit substance in their lifetime. And that's a lot of folks. The other reality is that 80 to 90% of people do not have substance dependence, do not have problematic substance use, do not experience repeated harms related to their substance use. And that means many folks, in fact, the majority of folks who use substances do it in a way that it creates no harms at all to them. So I would like everybody to take a moment to think of somebody you love that uses substances, regardless of how their relationship looks to their substance use. And I would encourage people to go into the chat. I'll give folks a few minutes to just tell us 1 or 2 things you love about them. Please don't tell us who your loved one is. We just want you to tell us some of the things you love about them. And to get us started and thinking about it, I would say I have a lot of people in my life who use substances, but when I think about one individual, she is a great mother, and she's also really funny, a very, very funny person. So I see someone put in there, they're sensitive and very intelligent. Excellent. They're compassionate and present. They have a sense of humor and love how they show up for the people in her life. They have so many gifts. They don't play out. His jokes and laughs make me laugh. Yes, excellent. Generous, compassionate, loving, kind, survivor, creative and driven. Excellent. And as we look at what folks are putting in there for the things they love about their loved ones, we just want to be cognizant that where we usually get our information around drugs and alcohol aren't usually grounded in this kind of a place. They're not usually grounded in the fact that we love people who use substances, that we're highly invested in one another's wellness. And as people who use substances, we take care of ourselves, we take care of our community, we take care of our children, we take care of one another, and we strive to do that regularly. And we really want to think about how the discourses and the negative rhetoric around people who use substance really play a role in how we treat people who use substances. It's kind of like the war on drugs making its way into our personal lives when we don't take a moment to think about all the things we love about our loved ones. And so as we carry on in our hour, I'm just going to ask folks to be mindful of how we think about, as we talk about harm reduction, who we're imagining and what we're picturing, and keep at the forefront our loved ones who are amazing human beings, who are lovely and kind and generous and creative and always there for us. That's the folks we want to be thinking about as we have our discussion over the next hour. We are going to start with Indigenous harm reduction, folks, and we start with this because we are being mentored by our Indigenous leadership to recognize that Indigenous harm reduction has been on these lands for a very long time, just like most Indigenous science. And this is not to dismiss the HIV movement that came out of the 80s and 90s with the harm reduction movement that came out of the 80s and 90s with the HIV movement. Of course, that is a very valid, amazing harm reduction movement that has brought us to where we are today. But we have to start in a place on these lands where recognizing that harm reduction has been around for a very long time, not just since the 80s and 90s, right? So this is a key resource we like to share with folks that was done by Indigenous leaders across Canada that really recognizes that Indigenous harm reduction has been here since time immemorial, but that harm reduction stepped up its game when colonization started to become policy here on these lands. And we're not going to go through the briefing, the policy brief here, but I do encourage folks to have a look at it. It's about 16 pages, and it really gets us to think about harm reduction maybe in a different way. But I do want to share a couple points out of this document. One is that Indigenous harm reduction is about supporting policies, programs, and practices that are community-based, peer-led, trauma-informed, distinctions-based, and culturally safe, and have a built-in reflexive component to ensure that colonial systems are not reinscribed. Further, they go on to say that supporting policies, programs, and practices that are grounded in local Indigenous knowledge, traditions, teachings, ceremonies, land, and languages where appropriate. And for Indigenous communities, harm reduction means reducing the harms of colonization. This means it is not tied to substance use and instead is a way of life embedded within traditional knowledge systems that see the spiritual world, the natural world, and humanity as interrelated. And really, it's what we've been told, it's about a way of life and how do we live a good life and have a good relationship to any substances that we may be using. I'm going to share a video to get us started thinking about harm reduction. And as this video loads up, I just want to acknowledge that this video came from Churchill, a group of men, the caregiver warriors in Churchill, worked with a company and a production company and did a Movember video here, so which is a beautiful representation of Indigenous harm reduction.
Nanatuge. Pay attention. Look around. What do you see?
Colonization has stripped many of our men their identity. We do have the highest suicide rates in the world. We have some of the worst poverty rates. All of that leads to disparities.
It's common in Churchill for people just struggling, you know, like trying to find their way.
We've been so traumatized. Our people have been through so much.
There's a train here, and it's time to stop the train and start to drive it.
Where did we learn to be men, right? You know, growing up as a little boy, watching westerns on TV and noticing these cowboys riding into Indian villages with their rifles, 6-shooters, pow, 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 and all the damn Indians would be dead. To be indigenous, to be Aboriginal, why would I want to identify with that?
As being a sober man, I've been on this searching journey of who I am. You know, my dad, there was always boundaries, right? Don't go on the rocks. You know, stay away from the water. Of course, where are you gonna go? You're gonna go on the rocks and go by the water. I've been taking these last few days in like a sponge. Like, I starve for these days, you know? Going out on the land, cutting the wood for the fire, connecting, harvesting our willows.
How do you understand these things? All of these trees, they're all different, but they're all reaching for the same creator.
One of the guys we were with walked down the beach and he returned with an eagle feather. He gifted it to me. So I was very humbled by that. I realized that it wasn't meant for me. DJ, I felt right away that it was his eagle feather.
I'm a Métis man with Cree Indigenous roots. It bothered me that I had white skin. I don't look Indigenous, you know? I feel it.
Like you're offering her some tobacco. It's a little prayer, right?
Go ahead and tie. We got one more tie on this end. Well, I think we're gonna be good. I think, yeah.
Okay. We're gonna do 4 swings. This will easily hold 20 people easy. Gun! Stop and bring it down more. Come this way.
You know, the younger generation also suffers, and we need to help them.
I deal with anxiety a lot, causing a lot of trouble when I was young.
Do you ever experience like racism?
A lot. When I was going in my group home. Just like I was talking about the other day, that I'm a attempted suicide survivor.
Do you want to talk about that at all?
Okay, no. So this end here, wrap it around.
I can understand that. When I was his age, I wouldn't have said nothing. He asked who wanted to be named. Of course, I put my hand up. I wanna know. You know, I wanna know.
My name, Bimashiginu, Soaring Eagle. You think about a soaring eagle, you know, they're way up, they observe people, right? A lot of times, I'm looking for that one person that maybe needs to talk to somebody, right?
I want to get named, but I couldn't because last night.
You know, he even had a few drinks the other night, but he still had enough respect to say, hey, I can't partake now, right? And I thought that was cool, right?
It's part of my journey. It's part of my search. This is what I need to do for my Métis Cree heritage. I'm really looking forward to getting named.
I call to creation. Owena, who wants to take this young man as a namesake and guide him? I get a response from the spirit world.
He looks at me and then he says, Opiska Migwen. That means white feather. 2 days before, I was meant to get this eagle feather, right? And I was meant to get my name, White Feather. It's pretty special.
All I did was ask spirit world for a name for my brother. He had longed to receive an eagle feather. That white feather is the tail feather of an eagle. It's critical to the direction of that flight. There is scientific evidence now, the granting, the gifting of names, and what that does to the grief tap, I call it. It shuts it off. When you're given a name, you're given a new identity. You understand? You are. One minute. All the trauma that made you who you are up to this point, we're turning that off. This is who you are now. Go out, find yourself. Leave that pain. That's how significant this is for these men that were named. They have a new tool to work with in their own healing, their own wellness, to bring their own loved ones, their family, their children, their grandchildren forward. They've got a new identity.
Our elder today, he said, you know, a warrior's not like someone who can fight, you know? It's helping others, doing good things, supporting your family, being a good person.
We're very good at being lone wolves, you know. We struggle through life alone. That's only the tip of the iceberg in terms of how we've been affected. Seeing these men here in the community really truly come together and working together, you know, being elbow to elbow together, I thought was really powerful. Us standing up strong, with our heads held up high as Indigenous men.
In the past couple of days, I really connected with people.
Against all odds, this community has changed the trajectory for their men. And we've just given them an opportunity to make that happen.
It's our knowledge, our ceremonies, our connection to spirit, to the land. This is how I stand. This is where I stand. This is my roots. This is our story. We have to know who we are. That is what's going to save us as Indigenous people.
I'm a proud Métis man. That step is huge. Take that first step.
In response to that video, I just want to acknowledge a couple of things. One is that the group comes together around their substance use and their mental health, and important to recognize that the work that they do doesn't focus on their substance use and mental health. It focuses on their wellness and what do they need in life, right? It's not just, well, I guess it's their mental health too, but not just their substance use. And that's one of the things that's unique in how we think about community-driven responses to address substance use, is that we really just need to build connection back. And if you recall, there was a young man in the video named Fabian, and although he didn't participate in the sweat lodge, he did still identify that he got connection and felt connected after that weekend. So really important for us to think a little bit different about what how we frame our relationships with substances. And then, of course, recognizing that culture, regardless of what culture and whose culture is intervention in problematic substance use. And it's also prevention in problematic substance use. And I caution, we don't talk about prevention and intervention of substance use because people's relationships with their substances are their decision, but we do want to support people to reduce problematic relationships with their substance use. So for folks who are looking for more information on culture as intervention or prevention, you can check out Thunderbird Foundation. Now, here are a few definitions of harm reduction that we really like to look at and to consider. There are a lot of definitions out there. I am going to read, I don't typically read slides, but I'm going to read these slides here for folks. So the first one comes out of the Canadian Harm Reduction Network, and it says harm reduction refers to policies, programs, and practices that aim to reduce the negative health, social, and economic consequences that may ensue from the use of both legal and illegal psychoactive drugs, without necessarily reducing drug use. Its cornerstones are public health, human rights, and social justice. And so a couple things we like out of this definition is it pulls in both legal and illegal substances that people may use, recognizing that everybody could have better outcomes with their substance use, even if their substance use never changes. We can all still be safer and reduce the harms related to it. Recognizing the cornerstones of public health, human rights, and social justice, important to recognize that people who use drugs have a human right to attain the highest standard of care in Canada. In fact, globally, but with saying that, we also recognize that people who use substances and are impacted by colonial and structural violence are treated the most poorly when it comes to accessing healthcare services. So really important for us to recognize it is a human right, but how people actually are treated looks a little different in our systems. The second definition says harm reduction refers to policies, programs, and practices that aim to minimize negative health, social, and legal impacts associated with drug use, drug policies, and drug laws. And we like this definition, folks, because it recognizes that drug laws often cause, drug laws and drug policies cause more harms than drugs ever will. And so really important for us to start to think about the war on drugs and the implications it's had for people who use drugs globally. And then this next definition we really like, it comes out of Streetworks in Edmonton. It says harm reduction recognizes that people use drugs for many reasons. Reduction of substance use and or abstinence is not required in order to receive respect, compassion, or services. It is clear that most people who use substances do not experience problems, but in some circumstances, substance use can become dependent or chaotic. Harm reduction enhances the ability of people who use substances to have increased control over their lives and their health, and allows them to take protective and proactive measures for themselves, their families, and their communities. And there's lots of things we love about this definition, but mostly the thing I want to highlight today is the recognition that people who use drugs have always taken care of people who use drugs and have always been invested in safety in their communities. And so who knows what people who use drugs need? People who use drugs. And so that is one of the most profound strengths of harm reduction, is that it is a grassroots movement that has come from people who are impacted, taking care of people who are impacted. So I'm going to open it up to you folks just to see where folks are at with examples of harm reduction. So if people can go back to the chat and maybe share some examples of harm reduction that you are familiar with. I'll give folks a minute here. Handing out new needles, absolutely, Kira, yeah. And in addition to new needles, we hand out additional harm reduction supplies like waters, maybe cookers, maybe filters, things like that. Excellent example. Any other examples folks have? Safe consumption sites. Yes, thank you, Rebecca. And we are pretty excited with the hope of being able to move forward with safe consumption sites. Manitoba is the only province west of Quebec that does not have a safe consumption site. We do, though, are fortunate enough to have the mobile overdose prevention site through Sunshine House, which is really great. Yes, sharps containers in parks. And what we want to recognize is that regardless of needle distribution, we want to always ensure that we set up sharps disposal of a complete supply distribution program includes a plan to dispose of needles, of course. And then we have another one here. If it's a close friend or family member, being there for them, sitting with them, listening, talking, and providing a safe place. Absolutely. That's great, Hallie. Yes, harm reduction is about compassion and kindness and respect, and giving people a safe place to exist and to share, because often people who use substances that are impacted due to stigma don't have that. Excellent, excellent. Trip sitters are an example of what Haley said. Yep, excellent. Warming spaces, housing first policies. Absolutely. We know that housing, primarily safe housing, is the #1 determinant of all health outcomes. And so housing first policies are absolutely key. And what we know is that most people do use their substances in the safety of their own home. But when you don't have the safety of your own home, that of course is going to increase potential harms related to substance use. Be non-judgmental, absolutely, Renee. That is a key component to harm reduction as well. So a few other examples, these are all great examples, but I want to give a few other examples. I want to recognize that things like vaccinations are a harm reduction strategy. Prenatal care is a harm reduction strategy. We also recognize that education and providing adequate education to folks and honest information, particularly to folks when we are going to engage in the most amount of harm in our life, or take the most, sorry, not the most amount of harm, the most amount of risk in our life, which is between 15 and 24 years old. We want to make sure that folks have all the information and all of the resources at their disposal in order to make choices around their behaviors that will keep them as safe as possible. Clarifying that support is unconditional. Thank you. And really important for us to think about what unconditional means to us. We don't have time to delve into that today. But if there are any conditions to our support, so if people, attend our services and they're under the influence, and that's a condition to not being able to access services, that's conditional, right? We really want to make sure that we accept people as they are, and that they're welcomed into our spaces, into our lives as they are. Boundaries, we don't have time to talk about boundaries. Boundaries are important, but we still want to make sure that that it's unconditional. Our service delivery as well as our support for our loved ones are unconditional. Excellent, great examples, folks. Oh, we have another one, allowing people to share their substance use story to referral sources when and how they want to. Yes, absolutely. Okay, thank you. Okay, let's carry on. Wrong one. So one of the key principles of harm reduction is ensuring that it is led by communities. So harm reduction is transparent and accountable. It values meaningful engagement and participation of affected communities in the programs and policy decisions that affect them. And what that looks like, folks, is the principle of nothing about us without us. And some folks might be familiar with this principle. It came out of the community of folks living with HIV, where they said anything related to HIV, you need to engage those of us living with HIV to do it. And so this is the manifesto that came out of the folks of people who use illegal drugs. And they said the manifesto is a declaration affirming that people who use drugs have a say in decisions affecting their lives, and lists a set of demands, including recognition, funding, support, and involvement in efforts on behalf of people who use drugs. So really important to recognize that harm reduction has always been grassroots. It's always been a response from the community. And it's always been people who use drugs, taking care of people who use drugs. And that, in fact, is the biggest benefit to harm reduction, is that it is driven by the folks who are most impacted. Oh, geez, what happened with my video? So I'm going to share a video that was done here at the Manitoba Harm Reduction Network.
I am a mother.
I am a daughter.
I am an artist.
I am a sister. I am a dancer.
I'm a father.
I am a professional. I'm a university student.
I am a good supporter.
I'm an advocate.
I'm a musician. I'm an artist, and I'm a community activist.
We're people. You know, we're just like everybody else. I work. I'm caring and honest, and like, I'm not a bad person. I'm a good person, and people that know me wouldn't even know that I do drugs.
I've used drugs, and I know that people want to use, and they want to be safe when they're using.
Manitoba Harm Reduction Network is a beautiful vehicle to bring people in active substance use into contact with people that might be able to help them, or at least properly hear them.
Peers are community members that have experienced drugs, drug use, and they've been around and know a lot from their lived experiences. I've become like a pseudo counselor for my friends who are too shy or ashamed to seek help for themselves, and I say, there's hope for you yet.
The peer workers are there for support and to make sure that people are safe out there, and we get together to make changes for people that are doing drugs and how to be safe.
Like even get those drug testers. Test your drugs before you do them.
I can supply pipes, safe materials for them, pipes, condoms, whatever.
Almost all of the peers are trained in using naloxone, which is the opiate overdose antidote drug. It's literally used to reverse an opiate overdose. Almost every peer that I know has saved somebody's life.
When people give us a hard time, they think that we're promoting drugs. We're not. We're promoting safety when using drugs.
Right now, the drug supply is poison. I've been to over 10 funerals in this past month. I've lost my niece, I lost my cousin, and just last week I lost a friend.
I've lost 2 daughters, 2 nephews, and a niece like within a year. It's not because they took too much, it is because they're mixed with other stuff. Nobody knows what's in there. And one of the things we do is to tell everybody, like, check your dope first, because you don't know what you're getting. You don't.
I just lost a friend. I've lost lots of friends to overdose over the years, actually.
My daughter's on down right now. I pray every day that, I don't get a knock on the door. She said she went for help 3 times and they turned her away 3 times. They keep telling her to come back another time. And I was going, I don't know if there's even gonna be another time, so it's difficult, but I love my daughter with all my heart.
I think that a harm reduction ward would be super helpful at the hospital, because then people like myself can still go to the hospital and still receive the care that we deserve and we need.
I think we need a safe injection site. That would save a lot of lives. For sure.
So safe supply. If we know that there is a toxic supply, then why wouldn't we just, provide an opiate alternative that is not toxic?
We need the community to be understanding and more supportive and realize that we're losing lives.
When I came out as a person who used drugs, I lost safety, stability, and security. I just wish that we lived in a time and place where those things weren't jeopardized because I was a person who used drugs.
Okay. It's weird to facilitate this and not be able to get feedback from everybody, but let's see how we do here. So I'm going to just share a few key principles, additional principles of harm reduction in the time we have left. The first one here is that harm reduction meets people where they're at to engage them in reducing harms associated with their behavior while they're still engaging in those behaviors. And this one, folks, recognizes that when people are under the influence, we absolutely can still do work with folks. We can still support them. And at the very least, the 3 things we could do when people are under the influence, either in our spaces or in our homes, is we can feed them, we can give them water, and we can give them a place to rest. And those are pretty easy things to do, and they're pretty big statements. We know that feeding people is an act of love. And so thinking about how do we support our relatives in the spaces that they're in, and in the state that they're in when they come into our spaces is really important. But also doing it while they are still engaging in those behaviors, because if there's conditions that they have to not be using, then it certainly will put up a barrier, and it has, in fact, put up a barrier for folks to access services. The other thing we want to think about for where they're at is also thinking about outreach and going into spaces where people feel safer, because lots of our organizations or institutions don't feel very safe. And so is there room for outreach in our work where we go into spaces where people feel safer? And when people feel safer, of course, we could do potentially better work in that environment. Oh, geez. I think I have one more video here. Harm reduction is also kind, compassionate, respectful. But they have a whole series of videos that I would encourage folks to check out. But this video that I'm going to share is a really great example of harm reduction being kind and compassionate and respectful.
When we talk about people's healing journey, I mean moving forward. I don't mean reducing their drug use. I don't mean stopping drug use. I mean engaging in culture and building the relationship with self and getting to know yourself through here. Gela Casla Nuga Clackwealth, Nuga Marnie Scow. My traditional name is Clackwealth, which means copper breaking woman. It was a name that was given to me from my grandmother from the Healthsick Nation up in Bella Bella. My English name is Marnie Scow, and I was born and raised in Port Hardy on Vancouver Island. I am registered to the Kwagilth Nation. I try to keep culture at the center of my approach to harm reduction. I believe that low barrier and no barrier access to culture really makes a huge difference. When I talk about people who are actively using substance, quite often we are pushed to the margins of society and we're kind of walking along the outskirts. And when we're forced into isolation or don't have access to basic necessities or things like culture, we can often fall down a hill. And it's so hard to get back up. So for me, I believe that everybody should have access to traditional land-based healing, to smudging, to prayer, to drumming. They should be able to be around it regardless of their relationship with substance.
Being like, you can't come here because you're using drugs is very difficult for people because it's like you're taking away their identity. Name's Kolyok Sedgmore, and I'm from Kwakwaka'wakw Nungi's territory. Use they, them pronouns, and my main title is just working as a peer supervisor at the overdose prevention sites. It's a very difficult thing to be a drug user in culture and ceremonies and stuff like that because you get called out on it, you get shamed for it. So by providing harm reduction, it just will show you that you can participate in these ceremonies without being shamed of it.
Galakasla Nuguam Gemachalas. My name is Millie Price. I am originally from Danakta First Nation, and I am now a member of the Weewa Kai Nation through my grandmother's lineage. We don't tell them you need to abstain because that doesn't work. And that's how you build a rapport. And what we do is provide harm reduction supplies, safe, clean needles, sharps containers, vitamin C water, fentanyl test strips and benzo test strips. Those are all in a package. And then we also put information in there if you were to overdose, what does that look like? And we also do naloxone training with them as well. And talk about how to be safe while using.
I operate here in Wet'suwet'en territory and I live in Gitxsan territory. I'm from the Lachkabu clan. The house group I belong to is Wilps Mali, and Sinet, Joanne Peter, Ksim Get Hawas, Sabib, Neil Basil, Lagabu. They're both passed, and they showed me how to do this work. A lot of us that have that dream power, that ability to look beyond just what's available and understand that, hey, there's a bit more to this. So culture to me is also the oral history. It's not only an oral history, it's kind of like it's not enough to know. You need to apply it. So we need to bring our culture back to life. And so we returned war canoe paddling to our community, expedition camps, so that we weren't just going to a campsite and returning home. We're actually venturing out further and going places where people are afraid of, removing fear about the land and animals. So people have a connection and a beautiful space to relearn who they are. Just being out there, the land teaches us so much. The ancestors are with us, and we learn not only from the land and the ancestors, but from our elders.
So we do like to do it in a piecemeal fashion of, you know, where are you, who are you, where do you come from, who are your parents, what village or community did you grow up in? And it's always important for them to acknowledge who they are and where they come from, because it defines them, defines who they are as a person.
I will always advocate for people to engage in cultural services, whether that looks like standing on the corner of Main and Hastings drumming, walking down back alleys asking if anyone wants to smudge.
Because grief is a difficult one, and it's really, as frontline workers, it's difficult, and it's something we carry a lot with us. But by releasing it through like cedar brushing or smudging and stuff, it can release some of that. I feel like it can release some of that. And then it's also for a way for us to kind of cry but not cry by just releasing the energy that we've been building up.
A lot of these things that are going on for people have nothing to do with me, and it's not about me. And I try to remember that I don't know what has gone on in their day to bring them to this point. Have they eaten today? Have they showered this month? Have they slept this week? And so I just try not to take things personally while doing front lines during this overdose crisis. And I just always try to stay people first.
If you want to check out more of those videos, you can just search Indigenous Harm Reduction First Nations Health Authority in BC, and there's, I think, a series of 6 of them. But harm reduction is person-centered, it is non-judgmental and facilitative rather than coercive. And I want to recognize that even earlier, somebody on the chat said something about conditional versus unconditional. And what we know is that conditional services are coercive. And in fact, any services that we are going to require people to change in any way, shape, or form is a coercive service. And we need to, and what the evidence shows is that when we move to being facilitative, people actually have better outcomes from our service delivery. So really important for folks to think about what that means to them. We don't have time to do an activity around it, but you certainly can find lots of information on what that means. Sorry, I'm going to skip over that. One of the other things I always have to say, I have 5 minutes left and I want to do a couple more slides, but one of the things we always unfortunately have to talk about in harm reduction is that it is evidence informed. And even when we think of evidence, it's grounded in many different types of evidence, not just Western evidence, but community-based, grassroots, Indigenous evidence as well. So really important for us to recognize that about harm reduction. It's also very feasible, effective, safe, and cost-effective. And unfortunately, we still have to talk. 20 years ago when I started this work, it really angered me that we had to say it's worth saving people's lives. It's cost effective and we want people to live, but having to explain that it's a $1 to $7 ratio. For every dollar you invest, you save at least $7. Still feels pretty gross that we're still having to say that 20 years later. But harm reduction services are absolutely cost effective. And one of the things I want folks to think about is if we had safe consumption services, we would have healthcare professionals that supported folks as well as social service professionals that supported folks in those spaces. So when somebody came in and they had a cold, we would support them and we would monitor them and we would treat them and we would take care of their cold. And currently we don't have safe consumption sites. And what happens is when somebody has a cold and they're impacted by houselessness, and have been impacted by houselessness for a long time and adverse childhood experiences, they are more likely to have colds develop into pneumonias. And if we could take care of somebody's cold versus somebody getting a pneumonia and ending up in an emergency room, it is absolutely cost effective. And so we want to think about how do we treat people early on in their health before waiting until folks have to access an emergency room, which we know is where people who are impacted, the emergency room is the number one place they access services. So, and they don't get treated very well there, and they often end up leaving. And by the time they do actually get treatment, people are quite sick. So really important for us to think about the cost effectiveness, I guess, of harm reduction strategies as well. And harm reduction really is also about changing those systems. And I'm not going to go big into this slide, but I want to recognize that often when we're talking about substance use, we focus on the individual who is using substances. And in harm reduction, we say we actually have to focus on the systems and how the systems impact our communities, how they impact our families, and how they impact individuals in their substance use. Recognizing that using an anti-oppression lens means that we start to really target the causes of harms related to substance use, which is those systems, as well as the violence that our families and our communities experience from those systems. I'm going to jump over because I'm running out of time. But I do want to recognize that when we have relatives who have really complex relationships with their substance use, there is often, and many folks who work in the field will say, I haven't met anybody who doesn't have complex or experience complex systems violence, have adverse childhood experiences or trauma or other mental health, and the role that they play in their substance use. So really important to recognize that we're not just talking about somebody who just decided to use substances and using too much and is having some harms. We're talking about systems at play to ensure that some people's substance use is more harmful than others. And then I apologize, I always get ambitious and put a lot of slides, but we have 1 minute left, and I'd really love to end with Jessica. Jessica worked at the Manitoba Harm Reduction Network, and she was working on some really profound life-saving work when she passed away from a drug poisoning 2 years ago now. And Jessica's family has given us permission to continue to use the video to showcase the amazing work she did during her time here. So I will play this video, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Six, 8, 9, 10. Good? Just let them know that those kits are nasal naloxone, so they're not with the needles. We are living through the war on drugs. We are living through a war on people who use drugs. And maybe that's not even the right term, because we're not all living through it. They only had 3 kits left from the 80, I guess, that were delivered, so it's being used. People are accessing it. It's breaking down barriers. I mean, you could just come to the convenience store to get your naloxone. Why wouldn't you? My name is Jessica Peltier. I live in Selkirk, Manitoba, and I'm a harm reductionist. This is what we do. We just hustle naloxone all day. Naloxone is important because it reverses opioid overdoses and drug poisonings. I began using substances as a young teenager. Growing up in a rural community, there wasn't a lot to do, and we use substances. I feel like substances keeps people alive when they don't have the tools or they are not in the place to navigate their trauma. We all probably know somebody who has used a substance, illegal or not, in our life, and that doesn't make them any less deserving of love. What has really driven me in this overdose crisis came from a time where I received a text message from somebody in the community. This person messaged and had asked me for naloxone. We got in the car, I went and I brought them kits of naloxone, and I left thinking I had done a good deed. Realizing later that somebody had passed away at that house, and I felt so guilty. I felt so terrible. I felt like this burden, this weight was on my shoulders. The next day, they immediately took a meeting with me and a public health nurse and another peer, and we strategized about how we could flood this community with naloxone. I got my briefcase with my naloxone kits, my pamphlets, and I just started going to businesses. Following the gas stations, I feel like my next approach is going to be seeing if we can get it in with the hotels. And I started approaching them and just gathering a list of potential places that would be willing to carry naloxone kits as part of first aid. Hey, how are you? Good. I think I might have spoken with you in April.
The kits.
The naloxone kits, right?
Like, it's probably pretty huge. Like, I've never heard of anyone doing this, which is a bad sign, right? So happy you guys are doing this.
Thank you so much.
Good luck.
Bye. Going in and approaching people about naloxone or carrying it as part of first aid, and if you make it just about that, it's just we have wanting to support our members in the community. I think it's really hard not to get behind that. Every single person who goes into that store knows that they carry naloxone, and you can just ask for it, take it, go. How much less stigmatizing is that? Knowing that Shell, this big corporation has approved this at the corporate level, I definitely feel that there is opportunities to replicate this in other rural communities. What's going to show a change in this overdose crisis is change in policy, change in laws, decriminalization, destigmatization, decolonization of our systems. That's what's going to make the change.
Well, thank you so much, Shauna, for that incredible presentation. I know from my perspective, I learned a lot, and the videos in particular were very powerful, especially the one of the power of a new name. When the elder said, when you're given a name, you're given a new identity. That will really stick with me for a long time. I wanted to open it up for questions to the group. So if folks have questions for Shauna, this would be a great time to ask them. And maybe I'll mention one more thing before we jump into questions. So at the City of Winnipeg, we have a poverty reduction strategy that was passed by council a few years ago. And harm reduction is one of the objectives of the poverty reduction strategy. So in particular, it states that the city adopts a harm reduction approach to reduce the harms of substance use for residents. So building awareness in the city and the community about harm reduction, I think, is a really important step for us to start moving towards that goal as a city. So any questions from the audience? Okay, so we have one question from Deanne. Why do we not have safe injection sites in Manitoba?
Yeah, that's a big question, and it's a pretty loaded question. We had established a few years ago, there was a whole community of us who worked together and established that there was a need and a demand for safe consumption services in Winnipeg, and there up until now has not been political will to support safe injection site. But I do want to recognize that even when there was no political will, the community rallied with Sunshine House, and Sunshine House was able to open up a mobile overdose prevention site. And that site has been extremely busy and has produced more evidence to show there is a need for safe consumption services. And we want to recognize that most people who use substances have a safe place already to use their substances. It's their homes. And safe consumption sites really are geared to support people who don't have a safe place to use their substances, to be able to come indoors where it is clean to be able to use substances. And what they have found at the mobile overdose prevention site is that the demand is far exceeding their capacity. So in addition to being able to inject your drugs there, you can also smoke your drugs, because we know both ways with our toxic drug supply have led to drug poisonings. And they have, if for folks who are wanting to inject their drugs, it's about a 15 to 20 minute wait, because there's only room for one person at a time to do it. So it's a really good indicator that there is a demand in the city. So I think that was my best politically correct answer.
Thank you very much, Shauna. Other questions from the audience about Manitoba Harm Reduction Network or the harm reduction principles, or anything you've been curious to know about harm reduction? While we're waiting for other questions, one question I have is, at the City of Winnipeg as an organization, what are some of the things that we can do as municipal government to support harm reduction?
Excellent question, and a very, very big question, of course. What can the city do? Well, the city can certainly show solidarity and support for people who use substances by supporting safe consumption services. And then also thinking about some of Jessica's work, which somebody had a question already about Jessica's work, but thinking about Jessica's work, how do we increase access to naloxone throughout the city of Winnipeg? And so we know that there's been some work to increase access at libraries and other public facilities, and that's really great. What we want to continue to do is to train staff, because we can offer naloxone, but if our settings are still stigmatized, or there's barriers for people to access, then that in itself will mean that people won't be coming in, right? So we have to make sure that our employees are well-versed in the principles of harm reduction and adopt those principles as well. That's a quick answer.
Yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, we did a lot of work to get the naloxone into the libraries and recreation centers now. Our emergency social services team also has naloxone on hand when we do responses. But you're absolutely right. A big piece of that is the training and building awareness, so that it's destigmatized and people can get the support without judgment. Okay, we have another question. So Jessica mentioned that Shell in Selkirk carries naloxone. Do any gas stations or other similar locations carry naloxone in Winnipeg?
Not that we are aware of. Jessica initiated all of that work with corporate Shell and met with corporate Shell and got approval. And I think Shell's plan was to expand that programming. We have not heard follow-up on what that's looking like, which is part of why having people who use substances champion these initiatives. When Jessica passed away, she was in the process of working with Manitoba Liquor and Lotteries to get liquor marts to be distribution sites for naloxone as well. So as far as Winnipeg, I'm not aware of any Shell stations that are doing distribution. And in fact, Selkirk Shell station was the very first one. And as far as we were aware, it was the first convenience store ever across Canada doing distribution. So.
Great. We have a couple of other questions in the Q&A. So the first one is, in regards to suicide, what resources are available?
Yeah, good question. I would reach out to Clinic with a K. Their website has a great list of resources. I can't name them all off the top of my head, but we do want to recognize that there are resources out there, there's services out there that this is their specialty. So I would suggest reaching out to Clinic with a K, as well as the Canadian Mental Health Association here in Winnipeg for that.
Great, thank you. We have another question specifically about how can we as a city start moving some of our corporate culture towards low or no barrier access? And in particular, the person asking the question talks about how in some facilities there's codes of conduct that says you can't be intoxicated in those spaces. So I don't know if you have examples maybe from other cities or other levels of government where we're moving towards more of a low or no barrier access kind of framework.
Yeah. This is another massive big question because, in fact, we know that there's lots of different angles that actually folks have to take on to tackle this. One of the really big ones is education. People actually have to do some unlearning around around the discourses related to substance use and people using substances. And so there is a narrative that creates so much stigma and fear that we really have to start at a place where we back up a little bit. We have to do lots of anti-oppression and anti-racism work and look at how that relates to harm reduction, look at how that relates to outcomes for some of our relatives. So one of the first places is really around education. And then the other important thing is to start talking to people who are impacted by those codes of conduct. What do they say? What do they identify as the barriers? And also what do they identify as the solutions to engaging in those spaces and making those spaces safe for everybody else. Or for everybody, sorry. But that's a multi-pronged approach that we want, because in addition to all of that, we also need some cultural safety training. What does it mean for spaces to actually be safe for the people who are accessing them? So I don't have a quick answer to that one, anonymous attendee. That's a big, big question, but definitely starts with educating folks. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. If there's no other questions, we might wrap up the session. One other thing to sort of leave people with that really stuck out for me was nothing about us without us. And it's something that, in the equity office and in community development, we talk about that a lot. And I think, when we're trying to support people who use drugs, that is such an important principle to remember, to make sure that people with lived experience are part of the solutions and that we're really listening to those voices. So yeah, thank you so much for a great presentation. And am I the one wrapping up, or is that going back to Ali? Okay, well, thank you so much, Shauna. And we hope you have a great day, and please continue this important work in the community. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.